This is Dr. David Pomeroy, your host on ADHD Focus. I wanted to remind you that the show is not intended to be a recommendation for diagnosis or treatment of any condition for any specific person. Please consult your mental health professional or doctor managing your ADHD or mental health issues about any diagnosis or treatment-related information that you hear on the show. Refer your ADHD provider to the show if he or she would like more information. Thank you.
Just to let you know, if you're listening to the podcast, you can also watch it on YouTube, and it's streaming on the Experts and Authors TV network on Roku and Fire Stick. So our topic today is, to me, a fascinating one. It's about a new syndrome that's been looked at and more research and interest in it over the past 10 years or so. It's some characteristics of some people with ADHD, but also some without. The person who spaces out often or daydreams, seems lost in thought. Some move just really slowly, like they're not really with it. And it's called cognitive disengagement syndrome. And with me today is one of the experts in that topic, Dr. Joseph Frederick. He's a clinical psychologist at the Center for ADHD at Cincinnati Children's Hospital and Medical Center, a place I know pretty well, at least probably has a lot more buildings now, but I graduated from the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine 48 years ago. So Dr. Frederick specializes in evidence-based assessment, treatment of children with ADHD, and he's the lead psychologist at the first CDS clinical service at Cincinnati General. Dr. Frederick, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you. It's very glad to be here. I'm excited to talk about this topic.
And it's something that when it first was considered, observed, was called sluggish cognitive tempo. Mm-hmm. And then there was a meeting of a number of people who were looking at it, and they thought, let's get a more descriptive name of it. So could you talk us through just the cognitive and disengagement, what those mean in what people see?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'll quickly take a little bit of a step back and talk about kind of the backstory of what was first called, like you said, the sluggish cognitive tempo. And it was about the time where in our diagnostic manuals, they were looking at individuals who had ADD without the hyperactive impulsive. Mm-hmm. They found a subset of individuals who had kind of a different form of attention problems than your characteristic of inattention ADHD. So like you said, individuals prone to daydreaminess, staring, spaciness. And the research, it was first identified back in like the 1980s, and it stalled a little bit. But the research really picked up in the early 2000s and have hundreds of studies that have looked at this set of symptoms that are related to ADHD, but they're also separate, different types of attention problems. When this started to get out in the public for the sluggish cognitive tempo, there was a couple things we were experiencing that wanted us to make a name change. And the first one was the term sluggish cognitive. It implied was often offensive or pejorative, someone implying a cognitive or an intellectual delay or a deficit. And what Dr. Barkley has talked about in the past as well was it assumed we understood that the core nature of it was this slowed processing speed or this slow cognitive processing, which we did not find out to be true. So a couple of us met together to talk about what would be a term that would be less offensive and would also just be more descriptive and would capture what the true nature of this construct and this syndrome is. Mm-hmm. The cognitive disengagement was selected because one of the core parts of this is individuals who are often experiencing this mental decoupling from the current environment. And so there's this internal distraction. The mind is wandering. The mind is lost in thought. The mind is drifting off into daydreams. And then once an individual is so cognitively disengaged internally, start to find out that these individuals behaviorally were feeling some disengagement by feeling kind of slowed down or tired or underactive. So the cognitive disengagement was selected to really look at that those internal distractions and attention problems, which are quite different.
Was that slowing down something that was identified by the people with it, or more observation, or both?
Yeah, so this was based in when they first used different rating scales to look at the full spectrum of ADHD, to look at the inattention, the hyperactive, impulsive. Those rating scales would find this subset of symptoms that were identified as the sluggish cognitive tempo factor. And in those had different items and symptoms for the slow moving, the tiredness, the sluggishness. So that was found at the first start of when they identified this construct. Over the years, the more research and work that we've done has found out that the two parts of this cognitive disengagement are the cognitive part, but also more of this hypoactivity.
Yeah. Okay.
Which really is quite different than what a lot of individuals who have ADHD experience, where it's this general feeling, parents describing children as having a hard time getting going in the morning, or seemingly very drowsy or tired or underactive, hard time staying awake. And that's another core part of this construct as well.
And that's independent from, no matter how good the sleep they had, they're still kind of slowed down. But certainly they're with the pace of life and the distractions of the phone at night and having to get up at crazy hours to get to school too early.
Absolutely.
Kids don't get enough sleep. But even if they got enough sleep, they were still on this slow.
Yeah, it's a good point, because obviously if anyone is struggling with their sleep, they may experience some of the different experiences of disengagement, where for any of us, if it's hard to sleep, your mind is wandering a little bit more, you're feeling a little bit more tired, you're having a hard time maintaining that level of energy. I think that relationship probably what we've learned goes both ways, but sleep is not the primary cause of CDS. I certainly think, from what the research would say, it's a contributing factor, and as we'll get to, is an area that we can also intervene on.
Sure.
Symptoms during.
Sure. So how is the CDS different than ADHD in that some people don't seem to have ADHD, but they can be said to have the CDS?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first thing it's important for all of us to know is that CDS at this time is not an official mental health diagnosis. And so this is where we think of this as a construct, a set of symptoms that we know in individuals who have ADHD, about a quarter to half will experience symptoms of CDS. But we also know there's individuals who have CDS that don't have ADHD. And most likely, most of the research and work that we've done with families is it's for individuals who have more of the inattentive presentation of ADHD that are more likely to experience the cognitive disengagement syndrome.
So, how would someone, and it's usually, I imagine, going to be a parent, identify or wonder about how come this kid's kind of detached? Would they think, gee, maybe they have ADD, or would they come in to the pediatrician, family physician, and say, something's just not right? They seem to be spacing out too much.
Yeah. I think it gets to one of the things is there's a lot of reasons why an individual has a hard time paying attention.
Hmm.
When you have a child or an adult who has the inattentive presentation of ADHD, we know the core type of those attention problems is trouble sustaining and persisting with your attention, trouble
Hmm.
sustaining your attention on things that are lengthy. They may feel boring, they're uninteresting.
Yeah.
And then the external distractibility. So having a hard time filtering out if there's other noises or sounds, and then
Hmm.
disorganization, the trouble keeping track of things or remembering things. The type of attention problem when you have CDS is quite different than when you have ADHD. It's not as much persisting in your attention, it's the ability to orient your attention, where you may be so preoccupied and internally distracted by your own thoughts, your own
Hmm.
daydreams. And there's that disconnect between that internal distractibility and what I need to be focusing on in the current moment. So I will have parents or other adults use language where they say, my child seems to be in their own world, or
Hmm.
my child seems to be lost in their thoughts. My child seems to be paying attention, but it doesn't seem like they're hearing me. Not because they're clearly distracted by things going on
Yeah.
around them, because it's hard to stay focused. It's my mind is going adrift and I'm preoccupied with the content
Hmm.
inside of my head. And so that would be the way how it would present itself and look differently is when you have a child with ADHD, it shows up in task demands, homework, having to sustain that attention. This is this general internal distractibility and being preoccupied with content.
Okay. I know one of the things that to me is a red flag about ADHD is the child who completes homework but forgets to turn it in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it sounds like ones with CDS, if they don't have AD, they get their homework turned in fine,
Yeah.
but they may
They
not
may get their homework.
because they get
Yep.
spaced out in class, but they
And
get it turned in.
yeah, they get it. They get it turned in. The quality of the work, they may be able to attend to the details, but it will take more time. So that's a big difference is we have learned because of that nature of being the hypoactivity by taking
Hmm.
a long time, there is a link with the processing speed. And so I will have parents very commonly and teachers say they get their work done, but it takes a long time. They're one of the last ones to finish. We
Hmm.
have a hard time getting out of the door in the morning. So they may be able to get the work done and turn it in, but the pacing, the time for
Hmm.
CDS, it's going to take a lot longer. And they seem to be just going at a slower, different pace.
Everything's slower and the thinking slower. I
Yes, the
think of
thinking is slower, the movements. Yep, exactly.
an example of mom said, I say we got to get ready, get to school. We got 10 minutes. And 5 minutes later, she doesn't hear anything going on. She goes up in the bedroom and there's the boy with a book and kind of sitting there still in his underwear. And he's just totally involved with a book.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds more like the distraction of ADHD,
Yep.
not the sluggish part.
Yeah, I think that might be mom goes up, the child is still working on getting pants on, getting socks on. They're focusing, but it's
Mhm.
taking longer. The
Just that
pace,
longer time.
yep,
Okay.
it's taking longer time. And I'm sure you see this in what a lot of families experience. You go tell your child to do multiple things at once or a series of directions.
Yeah.
Children with ADHD, you could be forgetful, you lose track of it. But for kids with CDS, if they're not paying attention, it's because if they're lost in their own thoughts or the time it takes to do it is much slower. And that seems to
Okay.
be fairly different most of the time. Certainly people who have inattentive ADHD may struggle with time management and getting
Oh,
things
yeah.
done
Yeah.
quickly. But I think it's what is the reasons for that could be a little different as well. And then that comes up with, well, how can we help and intervene and give some suggestions for families?
So some of the other things that parents may notice, and this,
Mm-hmm.
again, they're things that have been mentioned with inattentive ADHD, though I think that was before there was much knowledge about CDS, certainly among clinicians, and that's social interactions. So people with kids with ADHD may be ostracized by their peers because they're saying things out of line, or they're interrupting, or they're impulsive and not listening to anybody else. How would that show up in a kid with CDS?
This is one where kind of what you pointed to, that we know a lot of kids who have ADHD can experience some difficulties in the peer domain, and that might be due to some of the troubles with impulsivity, emotional dysregulation, for kids attending to social cues. There's a handful of studies that have shown that kids with CDS are not only cognitively disengaged, but there's a social disengagement as well. And what this looks like, and what parents, but also what teachers, and what we see when we do real-time observations of kids with CDS in a classroom setting on recess, is they spend more time to themselves. They have a harder time engaging in interactions. And some of the kids that we work with, that might be their preference, but other times they want to engage, but there might be an experience of, this may feel too overwhelming to me. There may be a feeling of shyness, or the pace of social interactions.
That's what I'm wondering. They're thinking of something that was 2 sentences ago or 2 minutes ago, still processing that. So then they may appear to be out of it, and what's the matter? You're too dumb to follow it. You aren't smart enough.
And then there's a learned helplessness of, where I'm just going to stay to myself. And we did a study with some of the colleagues here where they had coders go out and they coded children, and we see, how do kids with the CDS versus those who don't, what do their behaviors look like in the recess setting? Found that they spent more time alone and in more parallel play than being actively engaged. I think your point is right. A child goes out to recess, there's a lot going on. You have to process very quickly. Who do I play with? Where do I go? What do I say? By the time they've generated that, it may be over, or kids may be fully involved in the play. And that is a little different than the true nature of the social difficulties when you have ADHD. So this does seem to be more withdrawal, more disengagement, and maybe trouble with some of that assertive social skills as well.
The other thing that certainly nowadays, whether you have ADHD or not, that's a major distraction, is getting totally immersed in screens, whether it's watching YouTube things or the YouTube shorts or Instagram or whatever. And that's a big temptation for kids with ADHD, particularly if they've got that shy or want to avoid social interaction. Their social interaction, some kids will say, do you play with friends? Oh yeah, we talk all the time. Well, that means 5 of them are each in their own homes, but they're talking on chat while they're doing whatever game. So would there be any difference that a parent would see, or it would just be, this kid's lost in the screens all the time?
This is a really interesting one. And I will say the research on CDS and screen time has a whopping 2 studies, and compared to the loads of studies on ADHD and screen time. What I could think, the 2 thoughts I have on this is, I wonder about, for the social engagement, is it possible a child who has CDS, do they feel more comfortable interacting with others, peers, on an online format? Do they feel like maybe pace isn't as quick? They have more time to think about a response and maybe text a response, or they're talking over a shared activity. Like you said, they're playing a video game, or they're playing a game. The thing I would be concerned about, given the hypoactive, the tiredness, the underactivity, the longer you're sitting there watching a show or a movie, it promotes some sense of just being a sedentary. And
there isn't that. getting
That's
out.
what I would be very concerned about is would that further promote this being underactive, less engaged? And then I
Hmm.
would be concerned about sleep, diet, depression risk down the road.
Hmm.
So I could see kids possibly gravitating towards it, but also worsening some of those behaviors of CDS as well. Um,
Yeah.
and then is it a sense of this internal escape? If a child is dealing with a lot of
Yeah.
stress, is
Yeah.
watching a show, playing a game, you can further daydream. You can further get lost in your thoughts as a way to cope potentially with stress that you have.
Yeah. And some games, not that I know anything about games, because I long time ago when my son was into those, we played, I don't know, Mario
Oh
and
yeah.
in the
Yep.
speedboats, and I was crashing into cafes and buildings and flipping cars over. And I thought, well, those aren't for me. And then there's ones like Minecraft where it is a plan things out. And as I understand it, you can take your time and figure
Hmm.
out things. It's not a
Yeah.
you have to act now.
Right.
The person doing it is the one controlling
They're
the
the one
pace.
leading it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe there's not as much of the time pressure and the
Mhm.
time commands. And a lot of the kids, I will say anecdotally, and when I've talked with families, these children are quite creative. They're quite
Mhm.
imaginative. I think if you spend so much time in your own thoughts, kids will come up with a lot of different ideas
Oh
and
yeah.
come up with a lot of solutions. And so I wonder, Minecraft being able to play out a lot of
Mhm.
different thoughts where there's not a constraint. It's not like we're on a mission and we have to get this done this quickly. It's a
Yeah.
different pace.
Um, so I'm thinking in terms of now that what the clinician may see in it visits, and I'm thinking particularly of one young man. He may be 15 now, and I think I first started seeing him when he was 8 or 9. And the number of times that during a visit he'd be with his head on the table and his
Mhm.
arms stretched out and just kind of sitting there, sometimes his eyes closed, and sometimes he'd answer my questions, wouldn't even look at me, or
Mhm.
he'd look like this.
Mhm.
Um, and no, or exercise, and even just going outside was a big deal.
Yeah.
And he was totally immersed in games, and mom was having to try to pull him away from games. So uh,
Mhm.
he's someone I would think of as more the slow. He'd seem to take time to think about what I said, or he just kind of, huh, what? Could you say that again? Where he was off somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, I think you're getting at a couple of things, behaviors. You're seeing possibly the sense of the sleepiness, lethargy, and then
Mhm.
also the slower response. And that's something that we have learned with expressive communication and language that a clinician may see, a parent may see, a teacher is takes them a little bit longer to get their thoughts into words, to
Mhm.
express or generate a response. So that could be a behavioral response, but it could also be, communication or language. Just takes them a
Mhm.
little bit longer to get the words out or to express themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of some kids in high school, or they've had accommodations in high school for extra time on tests, and now they're going to college.
Hmm.
And I'll ask them, what is it that you need, or why is it you need this? And some kids, well, they're going so fast, they make mistakes, they need to
Yeah.
go through. And some will say, it just takes me time to figure out what's being asked.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are they having a reading problem, so they have to read it out loud,
Right.
which
Right.
some do? Or is it this kind of distracted by your own thoughts of items in the question and go
Yeah.
off and aren't paying attention to the question? But it's almost a moot point. I can't say, well, they have cognitive disengagement syndrome. And
Right.
okay, what's that? Where's the diagnosis?
Hmm.
There isn't one.
It is tough, and that's where as I said, a good portion of these children will either have a diagnosis of maybe they present as having the inattentive ADHD, but we also know that one of the biggest differences is kids with CDS are much more likely to experience those internalizing symptoms, anxiety, depression, shyness, peer withdrawal. These kids do not have as many difficulties with those externalizing behaviors of explosive temper tantrums or emotion dysregulation or oppositional argumentative behaviors. They actually seem to have little to none of those compared to kids who may have ADHD. So it's as a clinician standpoint, really looking at other possible contributing factors, but also knowing that if you have a child that comes in where parents are saying they're in their own world, they're taking a long time, kind of those alarm bells go off where we want to assess for sleep, anxiety, depression, CDS, ADHD, because that's likely to be how it presents itself. And how I talk to, because you said there's not a diagnosis of CDS, I try to talk to teachers and parents that they have features of CDS. They have the behaviors of CDS. Kind of like this is a subset of behaviors that it's important for us to understand that's different than ADHD.
I'm thinking in terms of the kids, and this one boy, of it's not that he's shy, it's like he doesn't have any emotions. He just doesn't express much in the way, except this overly dramatic, exercise. To make me go outside. Bleh. But otherwise, there's not much emotion about other things going on.
Yeah, I will say in my my clinical experience, you have children with ADHD where they wear their hearts on their sleeves and they wear their, and how they're feeling. They're very expressive and they have big and unwelcoming personalities. And children with CDS, oftentimes it does seem to be more of a flatter, withdrawn, kind of disengaged, affected mood. And then as the clinician, that's where it's really important to look at, is this child going through a depressed episode? Is possible autism? I mean, there are a couple studies that found there is about 10 to 15% of kids who do have autism spectrum will also be elevated in having CDS. And you think about being in your own world, a lot of kids who have autism or being disengaged. So I think it's important to know what are the reasons for that? What are the other parts of autism that are different than CDS? To truly fully understand what can we do.
We're looking and talking about kind of teasing out the CDS from either separately from ADHD or autism or combined with it. What can a clinician do? What can a parent do to help this kid deal with school life better?
Absolutely. So I would say, definitely the first step from any parent listening or family member listening, if they feel like some of these descriptions or this language of the daydreaminess, the taking a long time, the tiredness, the sluggishness, I think pursuing an evaluation with a trained professional, a mental health provider, and knowing that parents being equipped that they may have to bring this up in the conversation because clinicians are not aware of SCT or CDS. I would say if they're in the realm, if it's an ADHD expert or someone with background in ADHD, they may have more likelihood that they're aware of this, but it's still relatively a new construct that since it's not out in our manuals. So I would pursue an evaluation and then bringing up in that conversation, either they've heard about this cognitive disengagement, they've read about it, they feel like it fits their child, and they want to better understand this might be a part of my child. My child might be having this. For clinicians, we have a lot of either self-report rating scales.
Hmm.
And we've recently developed a clinician administered interview for
Okay.
CDS. And they can Google Scholar, or they
Mm.
can Google these different cognitive disengagement measures. I'm happy to share if anyone listening wanted to reach out, and they're widely available. They're free to use. But there's rating scales, and then there's standardized norms where you can get a sense, does this child have more CDS symptoms than we would expect?
Hmm.
So that would be the first step, I would say, is that evaluation, bringing up the concerns for CDS, but also ruling out other possible
Other things,
factors.
sure.
Sleep, daily
Yeah,
activity.
that's,
That's a
I
huge.
didn't, had no idea 20 years ago when I started the more ADHD, especially, that I would end up being a sleep doc half the time,
Yeah,
because sleep is so foundational.
so
And
important.
at the same time,
Yeah.
people with ADD either
Yep.
want to do something else, whether it's parents or kids,
Yep.
or they're thinking of so many things at once, and now it's nice and peaceful and they're lying down and this mind's
Absolutely.
going. So that's a big factor,
It's a
certainly.
huge factor. And I mean, if I'm seeing a family for therapy, or if a family is in therapy or from a clinician, if the child is presenting with CDS, one of the first things I would look at their sleep, the
Mhm.
time they're going to sleep, the quality of that sleep, and then daytime. Is the sleepiness, sluggishness leading to, are they taking naps? Are they more sedentary and passive during the day? Because there's been some studies that have found if we can improve the quality of sleep, we can improve the CDS symptoms. So it might be a
Mhm.
very quick intervention to start to move the needle to see less of the daydreaminess, less of the sluggishness, is improving the sleep.
Yeah, I recall one um, study that was reported where I think it was just two telephone interventions with a family and talking about what are the sleep patterns now and how to change those and optimize them, and whether it was a month later or follow up. And pretty much all of those kids were now getting better sleep. They had noticeably better attention,
Mhm.
and their what would be ADHD symptoms
Yep,
were much less because they were waking up and
absolutely.
could pay attention.
I
That-
think the general population, when you lose sleep, you exhibit behavior
oh,
that look like
absolutely.
ADHD, that look like
Absolutely.
CDS. And
Yeah.
for
There's
all of us, yeah, if you don't get enough sleep, the first thing that it takes away your attention, and then your
yeah.
emotional
And
regulation.
your memory and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of reading Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep,
Yeah,
which
he's
is
wonderful.
just a fascinating look at the what's the real purpose of sleep? What happens during sleep that we need to do that? And the brain's probably almost as active when we're sleeping as it is
Yeah,
not. And of course, all animals sleep,
yep.
so it's not unique. But it's something that I guess the raccoon doesn't have to wake up and get to work early and having stayed up too late.
Not as many demands. And
Yeah, but
anyone
that,
listening that's a parent of a teenager, I mean, how impactful is it to have those early school start times when your
oh, it's,
biological clock is wanting to go to
yep,
bed later, and then you have to wake up earlier.
exactly.
You have a
And
mismatch. And there was a study that our colleagues did here at our ADHD center where there was a group of teenagers where they put them in a restriction sleep trial phase
mhm,
and an extension. So some teens, they restricted their sleep, they got less sleep. It was amazing that the teenagers were willing to do it. They were very motivated
yep,
for the study. Then we extended the sleep of the teenagers, and we saw very strong effects on CDS
oh yeah, oh
when you're
yeah,
restricting sleep. So that's a really, in terms of treatments and intervention, something that I often am talking to families with, that I'm very interested and compelled by, is let's just assess their sleep. And if there's areas that we can change at the start of the night, when they're
mhm,
waking up, let's take the effort to do that, because it's going to have
yes,
some
and
payoff for their
payoff.
CDS.
And I would say parents being proactive with school boards and saying,
Mhm.
hey, and there are now studies saying, boy, this school district decided high schoolers are going to start later, elementary school kids
Right.
can start earlier.
Yep.
Gee, their standardized test scores went up. Kids, their grades went up because they were awake in the first and second periods.
Yeah,
And they
shocker.
didn't do anything except change the hours of school start. And it's just
It's amazing what those.
puzzles me why school
Yeah,
districts don't
I
just
I
do
I
that.
completely agree with you. And one of the things with a lot of families that we've worked with who have a child that has CDS, they selected the morning routine, the morning part of the day as one of the hardest because the child was having such a hard time getting out of bed. It was taking them a
Yeah.
lot longer. So if you wake up and you have this overwhelming sense of tiredness and sleepiness,
Yep.
and then
You
it's a
want to
slower
stay.
pace to do things. So one intervention and treatment we've done with families is how can we in the morning increase their physical activity, their social
Mhm.
activity, their sunlight exposure in the morning to curb some of that sleepiness as well.
Mhm. Now, one of the things that I call it I guess the school bus phenomenon where mom said, well, I don't take the short acting booster stuff in the afternoon. I take it when I wake up because I have to be on point to get
Oh, there's
two
so much.
kids ready for school, out the door. When I come back from seeing them off on the bus, that's when I take my long acting med.
Mm,
And I'm wondering if there's a place for, okay, you wake up and you take your 10
mhm,
milligrams of methylphenidate or whichever. So there's some of the activation effect.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. There's the if you would like, we could talk maybe a little bit about the medication to kind of
Yeah,
see.
that's another thing I wanted to look at because
Yeah.
certainly kids with ADHD, parents may choose to try stimulants for that.
Yep.
But if there's the CDS effect, are,
Yeah.
are medications going to be as beneficial,
Yeah,
or
that's
are
a good
there
question.
different ways to approach it, even with the medications?
Yeah. And because we know the methylphenidates, the amphetamine medications can be quite effective at managing the symptoms of ADHD.
Mhm.
There definitely right now is not enough research where we're changing guidelines on recommendations for prescriptions for ADHD or CDS.
Mhm.
And what we have found is that one of the interesting things is some of the research studies have found methylphenidate medication may reduce the CDS symptoms as well as ADHD symptoms.
Mhm.
There's other studies that have found if you have a child who's diagnosed with ADHD who also has CDS, so kind of that co-occurrence,
Mhm.
that CDS may weaken the effectiveness
Huh. Okay.
the stimulant medication. Now, it's been a few studies, so we need a lot more replication.
Yeah.
But we had families share that experience to us that maybe it helps with the daydreaminess, maybe it helps with the mental, but the hypoactivity, the sluggishness,
That's still
slow processing, families maybe not seeing a change in that as much.
one question that comes up to me then is, would the teachers see a difference? Because that's when the medication's
That's a good
going to be
question.
more active in school.
Right.
And then now it's
Yeah.
afternoon, kids may be somewhat tired anyway.
That's such a good
Maybe their
question.
medications are wearing off some.
Right.
The parent sees more of the slow.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Especially, I think it speaks to in the classroom how might CDS present itself
Yeah.
more, and how that might be different than at home, and maybe at school it might be more teachers noticing more of the daydreamy, spacey
Mhm.
out. The research that was done on the medication oftentimes does include both the parent report and the teacher reports. And
Okay.
so there
Yeah.
is some indication. And what I tell families is if your child's already been diagnosed with ADHD plus CDS, I would start with the stimulant medications because that's That's where most of the research is. But just kind of have an awareness and keeping on your mind that you may not see as drastic of an effect on the daydreaminess, the hypoactivity. There's some thought that atomoxetine or Strattera, that's been found in 2 studies to target CDS. So that's an avenue that some researchers are quite interested in. And then there's a lot of candidate medications when we think about medications for depression, medications for daytime sleepiness, modafinil or Wellbutrin, Jornay PM, which I think is interesting that it's active in the morning. You take it and then it's active in the morning. Might that help activate and address the symptoms early? I wonder about that as a possible avenue.
One of the things that looking at the taking medications, and a parent may have heard from friends, oh yeah, he took the medicine. Boy, he was right on top of it, getting things done. He's organized, getting ready for school, getting homework. And they're thinking, well, my son's on medication, but that isn't happening. And what I see is parents come in and say, it seems like there's something else. There's just, this isn't getting everything. And yes, the ADHD, okay, we're working on the sleep and doing strategy things on the ADHD, but there's something missing.
And I'll say that point is one of the reasons here at Children's that we wanted to start the CDS service, because myself, Dr. Stephen Becker, who's been one of the leads on the research on CDS, as well as Dr. Russell Barkley, we're getting countless emails or talks from families that were saying, we don't know where to go, and we feel like it's my child. I'm hearing my child. Because to your point, it seems like it's more than just inattention. There's something else, and trying to find what might be that explanation. And we hear that very often. And so families may feel a little disappointed or disheartened when medication is not making a drastic change, or the type of therapy that they're in. And that might be a possible sign that if you're seeing those things in your child, of the internal distractions, the slow response, the sluggish tiredness, that might cue you in on, that might be something in the realm of CDS.
And this is, I think, where for clinicians, and my, I guess, emphasis has always been, if a patient brings something like that up, I need to listen to the patient. Parent is the one who knows their child much better than I do.
They're the expert on their child.
And they can tell there's something different here. So it's up to me to listen and look at that, and
not just blow it off.
Not blow it off, or not think, well, you just don't know, this medicine's great, or something like that.
I think if you're a clinician or as a parent and you're hearing that language on lost in thought in your own, they take a long time, they're the last to finish, they can't stay awake. Taking that and really exploring, and for clinicians, if they do a Google Scholar search, they go onto YouTube, type in, there is a plethora of resources for understanding CDS, rating scales, webinars. The hardest thing right now is we don't have any single treatment. We don't have a specific treatment. That's the tough.
It's a kind of little, and sure, paying attention to the sleep, and that's got to be where you start with ADHD also, or depression and anything else. So one of the other things that I think I certainly find frustrating, I know parents do, in terms of, I think, the escape factor that some of these kids with ADHD and socially not comfortable and CDS is, boy, if I'm watching YouTube, or if I'm playing this game, or I'm in the screen part, then I don't have to worry about all that other. And when I ask parents and kids, how much time do you spend on screens every day? I'm not allowed to have more than 3 hours on weeknights, but on weekends it's okay to have 6. And I'm thinking, my goodness, that's crazy. And so I'm just really blown away by how much of the time it's that huge amount. And parents, I think, feel that helpless. Well, I don't want to deal with the temper tantrum to try to change it.
I will say, as a parent myself of 3 little kids, prior to being in this field, prior to being a parent, how can parents just give their kids this? How can you do this? Then when you're in that, you're like, it's a quick break. And I think, and what's frustrating is then you have children who have ADHD where their brains are wired. They kind of, they're gravitated towards seeking those screens out, and and
it's fast and it's changing. They get the instant reward of to get to another level, or they scored this points, or I finally managed to figure out how to get through this tunnel or whatever.
Right.
And there's that reward. You turn in homework and it's next day or later that you find out
there's not an immediate,
well or not. There
isn't
that immediate reward part.
And I think that's where I think it's so important for families to understand, obviously, when you're having ADHD, that you're getting that immediate gratification, that immediate dopamine. Mm-hmm. And so when you're trying to tell your child to do something, but they're on the screen, their brain is so locked in, they may not hear you. There's going to be a time to transition. Yep. And so what I talk to a lot of families about, with or without CDS, is obviously you have to set at some point some reasonable limits.
Some boundaries.
There has to be a clear expectation. And then there has to be a contingency on the child earning that screen time or earning that time. How you place the screen time. If you're coming home and you have homework to do, you have chores, it's a lose-lose if you do screens first, then expect.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's just not
he gets to take a break for a while after school, and then if it screens, that's not going to be.
It's just a hard. And I would say for kids with CDS, which might be a little specific, is the screen time getting in the way for the child? Is it leading them to withdrawal? What type of screens are they on? Is it fostering and encouraging social connections? If they're talking to friends on video games, well, could we maybe schedule then or use that as an opportunity to do in-person social interactions for the child, foster those relationships? But if the child with CDS is spending countless hours just sitting in front for television shows or YouTube, I'd be really concerned about the overall, that activity levels.
That regardless of anything else, but certainly it becomes an escape for kids who are socially awkward, and it's easier. And it's very, to be socially interactive and have an idea of what to say and those things, it takes practice. We aren't born knowing how to do it.
Yep.
And so the first few times you get shut down, or you feel bad that someone didn't listen to you or laughed or whatever. Mm-hmm. But the game doesn't laugh at you, and you get
safe
reward there.
Yeah, it's easy. And I worry, one of my worries too, and I think this is a pandemic of popcorn brain, where quick little TikToks or Instagrams, you don't have to sustain attention.
Oh yeah, those shorts
are focus too long.
Those are terrible.
And I wonder, we're setting kids up for failure by all the ways we've designed different social media, where they just have to focus for little bits of time, but it's bright lights, it's different colors.
Yep.
When my kids watch videos, I'm amazed on how captivating they are. The sounds, the noises, the animations. Yep. Then you try to tell them to pick up their toys, and that takes mental effort. That takes concentration.
Yeah, and it's not jumping around.
Yeah, so I worry about that as well for kids with the CDS, in the sense of their attention, their ability to regulate and control their attention, but also their confidence and that kind of growth mindset.
Yeah.
It's hard. I can continue and do it still.
Something that an adult told me about just yesterday, and of course, I've forgotten the name of whatever gizmo it is, but it's like those Tamagotchi animals. I think there were years ago,
Yep.
And this one is specifically designed so that you set up tasks that you're going to do. I'm going to wash the dishes. I'm going to get this report started, whatever. And when you do, you get some points. Or she said, I get to choose a new hat for my little animal. And if you don't do things, then the animal then could end up dying, I suppose, 3 or 4. So you have to do it to keep the animal alive.
Right.
So it's that motivation, and it's the instant reward.
It's the instant gratitude. It's the instant feedback and reinforcement. Absolutely.
Yeah, I thought that was a neat way to look at it.
That is very, and I think it gets to when we know that positive reinforcement works really well for children with ADHD. We know their brains are responsive to it. We know we use that in a lot of our evidence-based interventions at home and at school. I think that for kids with CDS, probably what we're using the positive reinforcement for is likely to be different. We're not focusing on decreasing tantrums, decreasing opposition.
It's more increasing engagement.
Increasing staying on task. Doing things. So I think if a family is struggling with trying to get their child to be more socially engaged or physically engaged or cognitively engaged, thinking about, well, how can we set some really attainable goals for the child and then tie in some of that immediate positive reinforcement as a way to incentivize and encourage them to put forth that effort on engagement.
Well, it's certainly a fascinating discussion, and I much appreciate you coming on the show and having us get a chance to talk about what this cognitive disengagement syndrome is and how it looks to parents, maybe teachers, of kids who are moving more slowly and they're just taking a longer time to put things together and thinking, or they're just kind of spaced out in their daydreams and may say, what are you talking about? So thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your time. And I'll ask you how can people see some of your work? Is there a website? How could they get in touch with you through UT?
Absolutely. If anyone, if they want to learn more about CDS, we've done some other webinars and presentations, and they can Google cognitive disengagement syndrome on YouTube. Dr. Barkley's done a few. Myself have done some.
And you've done some with Attitude Magazine.
Attitude and Chad. We've written an article in Attitude and Chad as well in those magazines. And if they want to learn more about our service, where we do evaluations and testing and feedback for CDS, they can Google our Center for ADHD website at Children's and learn more about our service.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And folks, thanks for listening and watching if you're getting a chance to do that. This has been ADHD Focus, and I look forward to talking to you next time.